Hello and welcome to another episode of The Switch. My name is Patty Hampton and I am so excited about this week's topic. Did you know that the nonprofit HR brand ecosystem has exclusively focused on the talent management needs of the social sector, including nonprofits and social enterprises, for more than 20 years? This episode is all about the post-pandemic social impact leader and how to build a crisis-resilient organization. Listen in as Billy Shore, founder and executive chair of Share Our Strength, shares how to create a crisis-resilient business strategy, practices, and culture. Share this production in your communities and download the slides and transcript. Visit nonprofithr.com/the switch for a video recording, presentation, and other assets. Without further ado, here's Billy Shore.
Thank you so much for pulling everybody together. I'm really pleased to be part of this. And I wanted to thank you in particular, Lisa, for your work and your writing on empathy and engagement and equity, which I found really compelling and something that, for me at least, is something that should be read over and over and over again as we continue to touch, that touchstone of what's most important to us. I've got to say thank you for the work that you're doing. I would say as one nonprofit CEO, I thought I always appreciated HR until the last 10 weeks or so, and got an entirely new appreciation of how absolutely vital it is to make our organization work, to make our organization effective, to make sure that our team has what they need to be effective. It's really a remarkable, powerful contributor to the end results. And I know that everybody on this call has probably worked harder than they ever have in their life over the last few months. And all of us benefit from that, not just the organizations you work with. So thank you. Thank you so much for that.
This event was originally recorded as a nonprofit HR webinar. Check out other nonprofit HR events and virtual learning opportunities at nonprofithr.com/events.
If you're like me, after the weeks that we've had, you probably have dark moments where it feels like there's no way out of this pandemic, of home quarantine, of persistent racism and its deadly manifestations, of political division over something as basic as whether we should wear a mask that may save other lives. And I find myself having to remind myself that, everything that we've done over the last 10 weeks says that there is a way out and a way forward, and that way forward lies in continuing to be animated by the values that each of us puts out into the world every single day. And I just want to make sure that in the face of all of the hard work that we have to do ahead of us, the hard work that Lisa has pointed out around empathy and equity and engagement, in the face of all that, let's not lose sight of the fact that every time we're contributing to, whether it's the environment, housing, education, healthcare, hunger, every time we're contributing to make a family or a child stronger, we're strengthening family and a community. And every time we strengthen a community, we are helping people to be better able to stand up for equity and for justice. And so we're in this fight every day. And although none of this will be enough in the face of the racism and the violence, the inequality, the justice denied that we've seen, we must also reject the illusory safety of silence and speak out. And even though it may seem implicit in who we are and what we do every day, we have to say out loud that every form and manifestation of racism is unacceptable. And for those who don't think that that's the business of a nonprofit organization in our particular spaces, I think we have to say out loud it's the business of all human beings. So we have a lot of work to do to better execute our own commitment to diversity and to equity and inclusion, from how our boards govern to how we raise funds to the public policies that we advocate. But every day doing the work that we're doing, we are in this fight. The stakes are very high, and we have to hold ourselves accordingly to very high standards. I'm going to describe for you one of the standards that my son holds me to. And I came across this in a kind of a roundabout way. I've got a 15-year-old, and for the last, I'm going to say 4 years, he has been lobbying me nonstop, relentlessly, to become a volunteer firefighter in a little town in Maine where we spend a good part of the summer. And there were a whole lot of reasons why I didn't want to be a volunteer firefighter. That didn't seem to fit with everything else that was going on in my world and my work and so forth. And he finally got me to agree to go talk to the chief. And I thought this would put an end to it once and for all. So I went and talked to the chief of the fire department. And after about 20 minutes, he said, well, you would actually be a really good candidate for the department. And I said, why is that? He said, you would lower the average age of the department by a few years. Well, that really shook me up, made me think you may not want to have a home in this little town in Maine where we spend the summer. But I still didn't want to do it. Thought I'd talk to my wife because she's pretty conservative about these things and expecting her to say no way. And she said, well, we have always, tried to nurture Nate's dreams. I was like, oh my gosh, you want me to be a firefighter too? Finally, I told Nate I was going to make a decision on Monday morning. And on Sunday night, as I was talking to him, he said, Dad, I know you're making a big decision tomorrow morning. He said, let me just make one last pitch. He said, if you became a firefighter, you realize that you'd actually be saving lives instead of typing on your laptop and telling yourself that you're saving lives. Well, I thought that was pretty harsh. But the fact is that whether we're typing on our laptops or whether we're sending out emails or whether we're convening like this, most of us are engaged, if not saving, in dramatically improving lives. We do have to keep, I think at the top of our consciousness just how high these stakes are. And what I usually have focused on over my many years in the sector, what I've kind of been obsessed with, frankly, is how do we do the work that we're doing in ways that are more powerful? Whichever nonprofit that we're a part of, how do we do this work in ways that have greater impact? And although it's really important for us to think about everything we need to do ahead of us, it's also important to realize that in the sense that Sun Tzu talked about it, every battle is won or lost before it is fought. And when I think about how do we do our work more powerfully, what I think about in this particular moment is how do we make sure that we have built in the resilience so that in a time of pandemic, in a time of racial injustice, in a time of near economic collapse with millions and millions of Americans unemployed and needing help, what kind of things should we have done and what kind of things do we need to do going forward to make sure that we have the strength and the resilience and the power to really engage in things, important issues like equity and engagement and empathy as we should. And I'm going to just suggest a few of them from the experience of Share Our Strength, and then we can open this up. And I say it knowing that we only have one set of narrow experiences of our own. It's been very surprising to me that over the course of the last 10 weeks, we've ended up probably having more impact than we've ever had as an organization. As soon as all of the schools closed in the country, many Americans kind of tuned in for the first time to the fact that there were millions and millions of kids who depended on schools for their school meals. And we ended up getting just absolutely flooded with new support that we had never had before and put us in a position to, in the last 7 weeks, distribute $19 million of grants to about 800 school districts around the country to make sure that kids continue to get school breakfast and school lunch and an after school supper, even though their school is closed. So those are being done outside of schools or at Boys and Girls Clubs or YMCAs or other community organizations. And the meals themselves are 100% federally reimbursed. But in this new era, we need to be paying for personal protective equipment and transportation and storage and different facilities to get kids the food. So it became a whole different program for us. And it required a lot of resilience, which was untested, frankly, in our organization. But when I look at the 4 or 5 things that put us in a position to do this, I would describe them as the following. One, I always talk about under the category of what I think of as kind of go big or go home, which is the notion of putting a stake in the ground around a very specific goal. And the most important thing I can say about this, and the hardest thing to do, and it's changed for us in the last 10 weeks like it's changed for you, is we've spent a lot of time as an organization trying to be able to find and articulate with precision and clarity one very basic question. It sounds so easy, but in our case, it was the hardest thing that we'd ever done. And everything else flowed from it. And the question was simply, what does success look like? Can we say with precision and clarity, what does success look like, in our case, for Share Our Strength and our No Kid Hungry campaign? Does it mean we're going to be measuring hunger or food insecurity? Does kid mean little kid or big kid? Does it mean under 18? Does hunger mean malnutrition or starvation or obesity? Or, so drilling down on every one of those issues till we got really clear in our minds that no kid hungry meant every kid getting 3 meals a day, every kid getting 3 meals a day, that they might still be poor. Unfortunately, they might still live with the terrible stresses of food insecurity, but at least we knew that they weren't hungry. And we were getting incredibly close to that before the pandemic. And then we had to change. Then success became replacing every school's school meal program and not measuring in the same way we were measuring our kids getting 3 meals a day, but just this urgent need with thousands of school districts around the country to replace their programs. So that was one thing. What does success look like?
You have been listening to The Switch, a nonprofit HR podcast on powering your people with talent management insights, best practices, and hacks. Looking for a thought partner to help you integrate talent into your mission's strategic plan? Well, the good news is Nonprofit HR has solutions to meet your unique talent management needs. Strategic planning is an annual ritual for many nonprofits. Yet, countless organizations plan for programs and fundraising without thinking about the talent needed to meet those goals and ultimately their mission. With more than 20 years of expertise under our belt and the bench strength of credentialed consultants, we partner with all mission types and offer solutions that span project-based human resources consulting and outsourcing, search, total rewards, and DEI. Join the community of social impact organizations that have trusted nonprofit HR to help them achieve their full potential through their people.
The second thing is just understanding that capacity equals impact. And here, I think, is the place where HR professionals play the most important possible role in helping to strengthen the talent and the culture in every organization. We all constantly get asked questions about overhead and cost benefit ratios and return on investment. And the truth is, if we don't invest in our own capacity, we don't have the impact that we want to be able to have. And nobody is going to make that argument for us. We have to be willing to get out on a limb. We have to be willing to say we're going to hire the best people. We're going to train them. We're going to retain them. We're going to make those investments that make this organization strong. Third, and I think related to what does success look like, is simply accountability to that. Ironically, being an organization that's accountable probably increases your overhead and your capacity needs as well, because you've got to measure your impact. You've got to communicate the impact that you've had as an organization, and none of these things come cheaply. But in our case, all of this put us in a position to be, I wouldn't say prepared for the moment that we're living in now, because nobody could have been prepared for what any of us are facing. And I don't pretend for a minute to say that we were prepared or that we're doing everything we need to do as an organization. But I think we ended up being as prepared as we could be and positioned to having the impact that we're having around the country now with all of these meal programs. The fourth thing, and it relates to capacity, it's a different kind of capacity, to me, is the importance of investing in brand. We're an organization called Share Strength, but 10 years ago, we created the No Kid Hungry campaign. And that brand resonated in different and more powerful ways for people. It said very clearly what it did, what we meant, that we were about No Kid Hungry. And we made a number of investments in it at the urging of our board, actually, including at the time investing money that we did not have. Not quite borrowing money, but getting out ahead of ourselves to strengthen our brand and do the different things we needed to do with social media and mainstream media and other places, so that when the time came that it was important, as it has been for the last 10 weeks, for people to know what the No Kid Hungry brand meant, they would. And kind of the interesting evidence for us is we're an organization, without getting into the weeds, that has never really depended on individual donors. We've always focused on corporate marketing partnerships and on events in the culinary community, cause-related marketing. But in the last 8 weeks, we've had over 70,000 individual donors, 92% of them new and first-time donors, just because No Kid Hungry meant something to them. So again, that investment in brand became very, very important.
You're listening to The Switch. Follow along with this podcast. Download the slides and other visual materials at nonprofithr.com/The Switch.
And then the last thing I would mention for us has to do with what I think of as something, frankly, that we came to late and later than we should have, which was the absolute critical importance of investing in public policy and in advocacy. So again, when we needed to, in terms of every battle being won or lost before it's fought, just to give you a simple example from our space, when the schools closed, the laws were very clear. We had to change laws within 10 days of the schools closing. The laws said you can only give a meal to a child, a school meal, if you want it to be federally reimbursed. We had to change that because no kids were going to school. Their parents were driving up to grab and go facilities. So the law had to be changed to say a parent could pick it up. The law said you can only give a child one meal at a time. We needed to make that 5 or 10 meals so the families wouldn't have to come out every day. But over the last 10 years, we had developed an advocacy muscle, a bipartisan set of relationships that enabled us to get those two changes and probably a dozen others through Congress in a really quick way. So this agility in terms of, first, I guess, the disciplined effort to say, what does success look like? And then the agility necessary and the flexibility to say, we may have to change that on a dime. We're not going to, of course, change any of our core values, any of our principles, but what we do and what we measure may have to change overnight. That served us very well also. Finally, the one thing, then we can open this up to any questions. The one thing that kind of keeps me up at night, probably the only thing, is just whether or not we're aiming too low. You know, we live in a sector that is used to scarcity and that is used to not having enough resources, and too often is used to doing what we need to do with whatever resources are extra or left over or donated, as opposed to the best possible resources that we can get. And I want to make sure that in our case at Share Strength, but in all of our cases, that we don't become victims to failures of imagination that stop us from aiming too high in the first place. If I can close with one more experience with my son, Nate, that also has to do with the fire department, just to bring this full circle. I ended up joining the fire department, which was not something that I had in mind. I ended up going through 80 hours of training and have probably responded to 60 or 70 calls over the last year. But on one of my very first calls, there was a woman who was having a seizure at a lobster hut in Maine. And we got paged to go help the EMS because they needed help getting this woman out of the building. And my son happened to be in the car with me when we got paged. So we drove there and I said, Nate, I'm going to park 2 doors down. I don't want to be in the way. You just stay in the car. I'll go try and help and then I'll come back. So I went and I helped the ambulance crew get this woman into the ambulance and helped with her family. Anyhow, when I got back to my car 2 doors away, I got in and son Nate gave me a kind of a sidelong glance and I could tell something was wrong. And I said, what is it? And he said, you're not in any trouble, Dad. He said, but let's just talk about this when you get home. I was like, no, what is it? He said, I want to talk about it when we get home. So I was like, okay. So we get home and we pull up to our house. I wrap him on the knee. I said, buddy, what is it? He said, when you say that you don't want to get in the way, that tells me that you're not thinking of yourself as a firefighter, that you haven't internalized this. He said, Dad, you can't get in the way. You're a firefighter now. Other people are in your way. And I realized that I had this kind of failure of imagination. I hadn't thought about myself in a role that maybe was different or important from what I'd been doing. I think that's something that we all have to remember. The work we're doing is so powerful. My friend Jeff Swartz, who used to be the CEO of Timberland, calls what each and every one of us does is offering access to the miraculous. We change lives. We have to fully embrace that this is the most important work that can be done in our society. It has to be well compensated. It has to be well supported. It has to be well branded. It has to be well promoted. If there were enough of us doing the work that we're doing, we wouldn't still be confronting some of these persistent problems that we've confronted for so long. So we need to attract more people to this sector, and there's nobody better able to do that than the group of folks who are on this call. So let's never let a failure of imagination stop us from reaching our full potential and bringing the world the change that it needs. Thank you again for persisting against so many long odds and obstacles over these last 10 weeks. And I'm just so grateful to be part of your community. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Billy, for sharing those great insights. And I think you probably have a lot of people on this call who are ready to hire your son in about 5 years because he sounds pretty insightful. So we want to open it up for a few minutes for any questions that people may have of Billy. And I can kick one off. Billy, you were talking about resilience, and I was just curious because I think I have seen a lot of organizations really have to pivot and be resilient during this time. But I was wondering, as a leader, how you dealt with any of your staff that maybe just weren't as much on the resilience train and were a little stuck, and how you got them to move forward with what was needed.
I'd say it's been hard. I'd say we're still learning as we go. We've tried to spend a lot of time communicating and over communicating and checking in with our team to make sure that folks have what they need. It's so hard to do this work and with so many different circumstances. We have very young staff, a lot of young moms and dads at home with younger kids. So we've been checking in a lot, trying to find out what they need. Sometimes it had to do with office equipment that we needed to get to them. Sometimes it had to do with more flexible schedules. And I'd say in a lot of cases, it had to do with more flexible schedules. We tried to provide additional time off. And I can't say we're perfect at it, but we've tried to really listen to our team, knowing that if they've got a problem, we've got a problem. If they're not performing at the level that satisfies them, and our folks are like yours, I'm sure, so conscientious, so dedicated, trying to do this work under very, very difficult circumstances, that we just wanted to make sure they had everything they need. And even then, frankly, just given how demoralizing some of the events of the last 10 weeks have been, I can't say that we're able to fix that as fully as we'd like to. A lot of it, of course, is just outside of our control.
You have been listening to The Switch, a nonprofit HR podcast on powering your people with talent management insights, best practices, and hacks. Looking for a thought partner to help you integrate talent into your mission strategic plan? Well, the good news is Nonprofit HR has solutions to meet your unique talent management needs. Strategic planning is an annual ritual for many nonprofits, yet countless organizations plan for programs and fundraising without thinking about the talent needed to meet those goals and ultimately their mission. With more than 20 years of expertise under our belt and the bench strength of credentialed consultants, we partner with all mission types and offer solutions that span project-based human resources, consulting, and outsourcing, search, total rewards, and DEI. Join the community of social impact organizations that have trusted nonprofit HR to help them achieve their full potential through their people.
Okay. Donna is asking, she says she's a firm believer for thinking big, yet many, and especially now, it's hard to bring people along. So how do you inspire from a daily walk? I hope I'm saying that correctly. How do you bring people along, I guess is the question.
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's something that I would say is also a work in progress, that it doesn't end. And I'd say the larger we've become, the harder that is to do. One of our mantras at Share Our Strength, we borrowed from a writer named Jonathan Kozel, who writes about a lot of social issues. And he says that you should pick battles that are big enough to matter, but small enough to win. And I really like that construct, because there's so many very important things that we all care about, but you've got to find benchmarks and milestones and victories along the way to keep the organization energized and resourced. And so I say that as a way, Alicia, of trying to say that we try to frame things for our team in terms of this, we think, is a battle that is big enough to matter. It's very important. It's bold but achievable, but it's small enough to win. And I think that is a way of helping people come along, celebrating successes, also trying to set the expectation that really significant social change takes a long time. It just does. And, I wish that over 35 years of doing this, I had found more shortcuts to it. It takes a long time. And the most important thing you can do is invest in a team that's willing to be at it for a long time, make sure it aligns with their passions, so that if you're passionate about what you're doing, I think that overcomes so many of the other obstacles.
Great. Another question I see here is, how do we prioritize leading with engagement, empathy, and equity when the demands on us as leaders are even more tense than they have ever been?
Look, I think you just have to make the case that they're foundational. Lisa's paper did that. Everything else, I think, falls into place more easily if your team is united around those. And so I think a leader's job is to say, we've got a lot of these short-term pressures on us. We've got a lot of things that are urgent, but there are some things that are more important than the urgency of the moment because they lay a foundation for us to be able to do everything better than we're doing it. And I think, a leader just has to help people see that and say that it's okay to let some of these other goals and deadlines move back a little bit, because once you get the foundation in place around empathy and engagement and equity, things are going to go a lot faster.
Great. Another question we have is somebody said occasionally our organization has set goals for some team members about being too ambitious, despite the fact that we work with them to set their goals, and this can be demoralizing. How do you balance ambitiousness and imagination with pushback for reasons of realism?
Yeah, you might be asking the wrong person because I'm the ambitious one. And I hear this a lot from my colleagues. I'd say one way to balance it is to make sure that you also have somebody in the organization who's invested with a lot of responsibility and a lot of authority to push back at you. So, for example, I have a colleague named Tom Nelson, who was our president and COO for a number of years. And a few years ago, we made him CEO and I became executive chair. He's a super talented guy. And he's frankly got a better feel than I do of what the organization can absorb, how quickly it can move. And we just work hand in hand. It's important to look for people that have talents that complement yours. Maybe they're not the same as yours, or frankly can be quite different. And then also the, big enough to matter, small enough to win. Look for ways to not overreach.
Okay, great. And then somebody else asked if you could elaborate a little bit more about investing in brand.
Yeah. So, I have found that in the nonprofit sector, was on a number of different nonprofit boards, that everybody loves to talk about brand. Everybody has ideas about how the brand of your organization should show up, everything from the names of campaigns to logos and so forth. And I guess one of my first takeaways was, this is an area where you should, turn pro. This is not something we should do ourselves. There's experts in brand, and in the business world, a group of people would almost never sit around and try to do this. They would hire a firm, and we ended up hiring a firm called SS&K that, as we talked about what we were doing, and they're a firm that does both for-profit and nonprofit work, they said, what you're really talking about is no kid hungry. And we said, yeah, but we would never use those words that, like that. We don't even think that grammar is great. We wouldn't say kid, we would say child. And we had a long policy wonky explanation of what we did. And they were like, no. People don't have time for that. They want to hear no kid hungry. And in fact, there's such an urgency to it that important that it not even be necessarily the language or the grammar you use, just something that the way people talk. So we invested in that, and we invested in, just a lot of the basic material, collateral things that you do at events to present it. And there were times where, again, it looked like, gosh, can we really spend this money in this way right now? And it really paid off in the long term.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Billy, for sharing all those insights. And thanks to everybody for your questions. I know we could probably talk with Billy quite a bit more, but we do want to go ahead and take a deeper dive into the competencies that we discussed earlier. We're going to have our speakers share their thoughts on each of their topics. So I'm going to start with Dan Cardinale and just tell you about Dan. Dan is the CEO of Independent Sector, which is the only national membership organization that brings together a diverse set of nonprofits, foundations, and corporations to advance the common good. Before joining IS in 2016, Dan served on the IS board of directors and several IS member committees. He also led an IS member Communities in Schools, which is the nation's largest and most effective dropout prevention organization, for 12 years after working in other positions at the organization. And Dan is known for his commitment to performance management to drive evidence-based programs and high-impact organizations. So Dan's going to be focusing on the room, talking about engagement. So Dan, I wanted to ask what points you would like to share on why engagement really matters now.
Sure. Thanks very much. And just a shout out to Billy, who I've known for many years and is kind of the social entrepreneur. I also saw Donna Marie Brown's name pop up, who could be talking on any of these topics. So it leads me to believe that it's going to be a great conversation regardless of what room you're in. I'm super excited. Billy made a couple of points that I thought were critical to what I wanted to talk about. First is that to think big. I think we live in an era now, and particularly with these two mega moments of a pandemic and the world cracking open again with an awareness of the racial inequities and a collective call to action around anti-racism and really kind of bringing equity into the world. So we're in, as a sector, the nonprofits carry a unique combination of characteristics. One of the most important is that most of what we do is with our people. we as organizations don't have factories, at least most of us. We have people, and people drive change. And so as Billy put out the think big, to actually aspire that we could collectively move the needle on these fundamental challenges of our world, it's going to require not just leaders, but the collective action of our organizations to be able to respond to these challenges in creative and new ways. So we're facing a new set of circumstances where our old playbooks probably don't work as well. We need to invent new playbooks. And that can't be done in the C-suite. That has to be done through a kind of thorough engagement of the people that make up our organizations so that collectively we can then turn to common person or our colleagues in the space, our collaborators, and work differently with them in this kind of adaptive mode. So Ron Heifetz has this notion of adaptive and technical challenges. Technical challenges, and Billy put it really well in terms of building a brand. You go out, you find experts who know how to build a brand, and you trust them to technically help you develop it. And you put that in place and amazing things can happen. Adaptive challenges are when there is no playbook. You have to figure that out. So we as organizations are in a profoundly adaptive moment where individually as leaders, collectively as staff, need to kind of work fundamentally differently in an innovative cycle to be able to figure out how to best respond to drive this kind of big, hairy, audacious goal that I think Billy challenged us all to think about. So if we're going to think about fundamentally changing how this country's history of racism unfolds in the future, that's an adaptive challenge. So engaging our staff as real interlocutors, as creative agents, become critically important in order to be able to innovate for the future. And then creating a space internally where failure is a learning environment and not something that people should be fearful. So engaging with an openness to pushing boundaries and finding what works and what doesn't is the work of our day. That's going to require engaging staff in a really dynamic way where punitive measures need to be fundamentally supplanted with creative opportunities. So I'd love to have a conversation about that with folks.
You're listening to The Switch. Follow along with this podcast. Download the slides and other visual materials at nonprofithr.com/The Switch.
And I know Lisa's going to be leading a conversation about empathy. So Lisa, do you want to tell us a little bit about your thoughts on why empathy is a critical competency for the post-pandemic social impact leader?
Thanks, Alicia, and thanks to Dan and Billy for their remarks. I'm looking forward to hearing from Sean. Empathy is an issue that's near and dear to my heart. I think one of the most critical skills that we can have as leaders is to lead with empathy, to recognize that empathy is about finding the echoes of another person in ourselves, right? Seeing ourselves and being able to recognize where they're experiencing challenges, pain. We come to our workplaces as human first. And as leaders, we are also human. And so this issue of empathy to me is critical, particularly now as people are facing levels of stress and crisis in ways they've never experienced them before. And so how can we lead otherwise but to have empathy and to be empathetic? You know, empathy is really about our ability to understand another person's experience and perspectives and feelings. It's really about introspection because you can't look at someone else's situation until you look at your own. And in order to do that, we have to recognize the humanity of who we are, the humanity of the people that we serve. And when I say the people that we serve, I'm not just talking about the community, but as leaders, we need to serve those who have contributed their time and talent to our organization. It's our job as leaders to understand, to be empathetic, to be thoughtful about how we lead so that together we can advance the work of our organization. It's, you know, empathy is about more than listening attentively, right? It's about really taking ourselves out of ourselves and listening to other people in a way that allows us to advance the greater good of our organization. And so, you know, my hope is that as leaders that we will strive to understand each other in this very complex world, that we will recognize the humanity that people bring to work. It's not just about, you know, our external constituents and our external stakeholders and our boards and our funders. It's also about us as individuals. It's about the employees that do the work every day and recognizing the challenges that they bring to the table in a way that honors them individually, that honors them collectively, and allows us to move the needle forward. So we're going to dig into that a little bit more and talk about the impact of our failures as leaders to overlook the importance of having emotional intelligence. And empathy is a key pillar of having emotional intelligence. So that'll be my segment.
Thanks, Lisa. And finally, we're going to hear from LaShawn Routey-Chotman. She's Executive Director of the National Equity Project. She's going to lead the conversation on equity. So under LaShawn's leadership, the National Equity Project has catalyzed a movement to revitalize our country's approach to racial equity in education. LaShawn previously served as a coach and director of Bay CES's High School Redesign Initiative, where her team pioneered new school design processes, principal network development, and site coaching that transformed educational experiences and outcomes for teachers and students in Oakland, California. Prior to joining the National Equity Project, LaShawn served as a teacher and leader at Redwood Day School in Alameda, California, the Wheeler School in Providence, Rhode Island, and Berkeley High School in Berkeley, California. So LaShawn, equity is quite the topic today. So please share your thoughts on equity as a core competency for the post-pandemic leader.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for having me, Nonprofit HR. Lisa, thank you. And to my colleagues, Daniel and Billy, appreciated your comments. In 1963, James Baldwin wrote a talk to teachers. And in part of that talk, he says the following: to any citizen of this country who figures himself as responsible, and particularly those who deal with the hearts and minds of young people, you must be prepared to go for broke. Or to put it another way, you must understand that in the attempt to correct so many generations of bad faith and cruelty, when it's operating not only in our classrooms, but in our society, you will meet the most fantastic, most brutal, and most determined resistance. There is no point in pretending that this won't happen. And so one of the reasons that that I started with that kind of prophetic and timely piece from James Baldwin is because in this moment in 2020, with all the racialized structural inequities laid bare in the last several months, we believe that this moment represents a fight for our collective futures and our collective humanity. And for leaders, we believe that we're being called to act more courageously, more unapologetically, and much more intentionally toward creating just, anti-racist, and equitable organizations that contribute to thriving communities.
Well, that's our show for today. Thank you for listening in to The Switch, featuring your social impact talent advisors, better known as CETA. If your organization needs to talk with someone about the topics we covered today, please reach out to CETA by Nonprofit HR, your thought partner, a global talent management program exclusively designed to support the people needs of your social enterprise. Together, our brand ecosystem has served the social sector for more than 20 years. I look forward to your call, 202-644-7423, or email us for a mini consult, info@nonprofithr.com. Looking for more episodes of The Switch? Visit nonprofithr.com/The Switch and access recordings and resources to help your organization maximize its greatest asset, your talent.